Every animal is designed to only live in one region. Giant squids live in the deep ocean. Lions live in savannas. If either went to each other's zones, they would instantly die. Not just from one factor, but usually from at least 17 different things, causing instant death. But for some reason, this animal right here is unkillable. You can put it in any environment in the world, and it will not die. You could not feed it for 5 years straight, and it still might not die. This is the giant isopod. But why is this creature so unkillable? And what would it take for this thing to actually die? Well, the most common reaction people have when they see a giant isopod is to just point out that it looks exactly like a pill bug, or a roly-poly, or whatever you want to call the tiny bugs you find under wet rocks in your backyard.
And you'd be completely right.
They're in the exact same family, but there's one massive difference. Your average backyard pill bug is about the size of a fingernail. The giant isopod can grow to be over 2.5 feet long and weigh up to 4 pounds. That's the size of a small dog. Well, a really weird, terrifying underwater dog, but still. This is a direct result of deep-sea gigantism, an evolutionary quirk where animals in the deep ocean grow to completely ridiculous proportions compared to their shallow water relatives. But getting this huge actually creates a worse problem for the isopod. Having a bigger body means you have a lot more cells to keep alive. More cells mean you need more oxygen, and more importantly, you need a ton of calories just to stay alive. So if you're a 4-pound bug that requires a heavy intake of calories just to stay alive, where do you even find that kind of food in a place that has absolutely nothing? To understand exactly how bad this calorie problem is, you have to realize what the bottom of the ocean actually looks like. When most people think of the ocean, they picture coral reefs, schools of fish, and kelp forests. But the abyssal plain is nothing like that. It's essentially a desert of mud. Because no sunlight can reach this deep, photosynthesis is impossible. That means no plants, no algae, and absolutely nothing to eat. If you were to walk across the bottom of the ocean, you could walk for miles and miles and see absolutely nothing but flat grey sediment. The only food that exists down here is whatever happens to fall from the zones above. Small flakes of dead plankton and bacteria slowly drift down in a process called marine snow. But for a creature as large as the giant isopod, eating marine snow would be like a human trying to survive by catching snowflakes on their tongue.
Which probably wouldn't work out too well for you.
The giant isopod is a calorie-hungry creature trapped in a wasteland. So if nothing grows here, and the tiny scraps aren't enough, how do they actually eat? Well, they have to wait for something bigger to fall. When a massive animal, like a great white shark or a blue whale, dies near the surface, its body eventually sinks. And when a 100,000-pound whale carcass hits the ocean floor, it completely changes the ecosystem.
This is called a whale fall. And for creatures of the abyss, this changes everything.
Suddenly, there's just food. Because food is so unbelievably rare, the giant isopod cannot afford to hunt normally. It just waits. It uses chemical receptors to detect the scent of decaying meat drifting through the water currents, sometimes from miles away. Once it picks up that scent, it begins a slow march towards the carcass. Because food only arrives in these unpredictable drops, the isopod basically just has to get lucky. It might take months for a dead whale to sink near them. It might take years. But when a literal mountain of meat finally drops from the sky, you can't just take a few polite bites. When a giant isopod actually reaches a carcass, they gorge themselves until they physically can't eat anymore. They have mouth parts that look like this, which means they have no problem ripping through thick blubber and muscle, and once they start eating, they simply don't stop. They'll eat so much raw meat that their shells literally start stretching. Their segmented armor plates will stretch to accommodate their rapidly expanding stomachs. They pack in so much food that they frequently become completely immobilized. They get so bloated and heavy that their legs can no longer support their own body weight, and they'll literally just roll over onto their backs, completely unable to walk. It's basically the ultimate Thanksgiving food coma. And this extreme binge eating is actually a highly calculated survival tactic. They're packing years' worth of calories into a single sitting because they have absolutely no idea when they'll ever eat again. Once they're full, they'll slowly drag themselves away from the carcass, find a quiet patch of mud, and just stop moving. But what happens when the food runs out? What happens when another whale fall doesn't fall for a really, really long time? If a normal animal runs out of food, we generally know exactly how long they have left. A human can survive a few weeks, a dog might last a couple of weeks, even cold-blooded reptiles like snakes usually need to eat every few months. The giant isopod completely breaks the rules of starvation. In 2007, an aquarium in Japan brought in a giant isopod to put on display. For the first 2 years, it ate normally, but in January of 2009, it just stopped. The zookeepers tried everything. They offered it fresh mackerel. They rubbed the fish against its mouth to stimulate its appetite. They changed the temperature. Nothing worked. The isopod aggressively ignored every single piece of food they put in the tank. And not just, oh, it wasn't hungry that day, it didn't eat for a week, then a month, then a year. This single giant isopod refused to eat a single piece of food for exactly 5 years and 43 days before it finally passed away. Most animals die in weeks. This creature essentially found a way to just hit pause on starvation. It survived half a decade on absolutely 0 calories. But honestly, how is this even physically possible? If a normal animal tries to do this, their organs just shut down. When a body starves, it panics. It burns through fat reserves, then it starts eating its own muscle, and eventually, the internal organs just fail. The giant isopod survives this by simply refusing to panic. Their biology is built around an incredibly slow metabolism. When they enter a fasting state, their entire digestive system essentially just shuts down. They aren't wasting energy trying to process empty space. Their heart rate drops to an absolute crawl. Their breathing slows down. They stop moving almost entirely, sitting completely motionless in the dark. Every single cell in their body is built to use energy at the slowest possible rate. They take the massive stockpile of calories they gain from binge eating that whale carcass and they ration it out over years. They prioritize pure existence over actually doing anything. They don't waste calories on growing fast, moving quickly, or keeping themselves warm. They basically don't waste calories on literally anything. Okay, so they can survive starvation. But starving isn't the only way to die in the ocean. Surviving for 5 years without food is completely pointless if you just get eaten by a shark on day 3. The deep ocean is full of predators. There are massive crabs, aggressive squids, and fish with teeth that could easily bite straight through bone. And the giant isopod isn't fast. It cannot swim away from danger, and it definitely doesn't have the offensive weapons to fight back. So instead of trying to outrun or outfight its predators, it evolved to just ignore them. Their entire back is covered in a thick calcium exoskeleton. When a predator approaches, the isopod simply tucks its legs inwards, pulls its head down, and curls up into a perfectly solid, heavily armored ball. Because of the way their segmented plates overlap, there are absolutely no soft spots exposed. The antennae are tucked away. The soft underbelly is completely hidden. They basically just turn themselves into a solid rock. And as it turns out, biting a rock is pretty difficult. But how would this actually play out in the real world? Let's imagine a hungry octopus comes across a giant isopod resting on the seafloor. The octopus is smart. It has 8 muscular arms covered in suction cups and a sharp beak hidden in the center of its body that can easily crush crab shells. The octopus wraps its arms around the isopod. Immediately, the isopod curls into its defensive ball. The octopus starts pulling. It tries to pry the segments apart to reach the soft meat inside, but the isopod's plates are locked tight. The octopus uses its beak to scrape at the hull, but the calcium armor is far too thick to crack easily. The isopod just sits there, completely motionless, letting the octopus waste its energy. Eventually, the octopus realizes something. It's burning way more calories trying to rip this shell open than it would actually gain from eating the meat inside. It basically calculates,
dude, this is so not worth it.
In a place where calories are precious, wasting energy on a shell that won't open means you aren't going to survive very long. So the octopus just gives up and swims away. The isopod doesn't actually need to win a fight to survive. It just needs to be way too annoying to crack open. But obviously being annoying doesn't make you actually invincible. Curling into a ball works perfectly well against animals trying to pick them apart, but they do still die. If a predator is simply big enough to fit the entire isopod in its mouth, the armor doesn't really matter. Deep water sleeper sharks or massive fish don't care how thick your shell is, they just open their massive jaws and swallow you completely whole. Once the isopod is inside the stomach, the thick armor doesn't matter anymore. The stomach acid will slowly dissolve the calcium plates, and the isopod will be digested alive. They're also vulnerable to deep-sea parasites. Certain types of parasitic worms and leeches have evolved to slip into the microscopic gaps between the isopod's armor plates. Once inside, they attach to the soft tissue and slowly drink the isopod alive. Because the isopod has such a slow metabolism, it can't quickly heal from these internal attacks. So to avoid getting eaten, you stay hidden, and you eat literally whatever you can find. And I mean literally whatever. We talked about how they eat whalefalls, but whales don't die every day. When they can't find a premium meal, giant isopods will lower their standards to absolute zero. They're the ultimate scavengers. They'll eat rotting fish that have been decaying in the mud for weeks. They'll eat slow-moving sea cucumbers. They'll eat deep-sea sponges, which are essentially just living fiberglass.
Yummy.
They have absolutely no pride when it comes to their diet. If they can physically fit it into their mouth, they'll swallow it. Researchers have even pulled up giant isopods and examined their stomach contents, only to find pieces of deep-sea plastic and human trash. Because they're so desperate for any kind of organic matter, they try to digest literally anything that crosses their path. Their survival is largely due to the fact that they're never picky. So what if we actually tried to live like this? To really grasp how ridiculous the giant isopod is, just imagine a human trying to do this. Imagine you're sitting at a dinner table and you eat an entire 800-pound cow in a single sitting. You eat so much beef that your ribs physically expand and you fall out of your chair onto the floor. Then, You crawl over to your living room couch, you sit down, and you just stare at the wall. You just sit on that couch completely motionless for 5 entire years. And at the end of those 5 years, you stand up, completely fine, and start looking for another cow. That's exactly what the giant isopod is doing at the bottom of the ocean. It's a way of living that makes human bodies look like a complete joke by comparison. If this survival strategy is so ridiculously effective, why aren't they everywhere? If you have an animal that can survive 5 years without food, has impenetrable armor, and will eat literally anything, you'd expect them to take over the entire planet. So why aren't we seeing giant isopods crawling around on sunny beaches or swimming in shallow coral reefs? The answer is that the exact things that keep them alive in the deep actually trap them there. Their biology is built entirely for freezing temperatures and crushing pressure. If a giant isopod were to crawl up into the warm, sunlit waters of the surface, its body would completely panic. The heat would instantly speed up their metabolism. Their cells would start burning through energy at a massive rate. Because they're designed to operate in slow motion, this sudden spike would cause them to overheat, burn through all their calories in a few days, and instantly suffocate. They're conditional survivors. At the bottom of the ocean, they're practically immortal. Anywhere else, they're completely useless. But because they're trapped in this freezing, slow-motion world, time basically stops applying to them. Because the giant isopod does absolutely everything so slowly, they manage to live for a really, really long time. Most normal bugs or crustaceans live for a few years at most. But because the isopod eats slowly, moves slowly, and processes oxygen slowly, their cells don't degrade at the same rate ours do. While it's incredibly hard to track exactly how long they live in the wild, marine biologists estimate that giant isopods can easily live for decades. Some researchers even suspect that certain individuals could be pushing 50 or 60 years old. Time basically moves differently for them. A month for us might feel like a single day for an isopod. They don't age quickly because they simply refuse to rush anything. They have stretched out their entire existence by just doing everything as slowly as physically possible. And this completely changes how we actually look at survival. When we think about evolution, we usually picture a very specific type of winner. We think of the fastest cheetah. We think of a great white shark. We think of highly intelligent dolphins. We assume that to survive in nature you have to be the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest. But the giant isopod completely ruins that logic. They have absolutely zero speed, zero strength, and they certainly aren't smart. They're basically just a giant armored potato, but they outlive almost everything else in the ocean. Sometimes, peak performance is just curling into a ball, shutting down your organs, and having the patience to do absolutely nothing while you just outlast everything else around you. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing, and this is one of the first videos on this Let's Go Swimming channel. And if you're interested, I'll link one of my other videos for you to watch. Oh, and please let me know if you have an idea for a video in the comments. I'm actually going to be replying to all the comments I see. See you in the next one.